AITA for refusing to pay for my brother's wedding after he kicked my fiancé off the guest list. Most people told me to just keep the peace. But when I found out the real reason my fiancé was banned and discovered the massive fraud my family was hiding, I decided to burn every bridge they had. I'm Julian, and today I'm going to show you why you should never mistake a brother's kindness for a brother's weakness. The mahogany desk in Julian's office felt colder than usual. At 32, Julian had built a venture capital firm that was the pride of the East Coast, but in his parents' eyes, he was still just the reliable one, the one who fixed things, the one who paid. His younger brother Leo was the opposite. Leo was a creative, a term Julian's father used to excuse the fact that Leo hadn't held a job for more than 6 months in his life. But Leo was charming, handsome, and now he was engaged to be married to a woman named Clara, whose family had social standing but an empty bank account. The door to Julian's office swung open without a knock. Leo walked in, tossing a thick, cream-colored folder onto Julian's desk. "That's the final estimate," Leo said, grinning as he sank into a designer leather chair. "The venue in Tuscany fell through, so we're doing the Hamptons. High season rates, but it's worth it for the aesthetic." Julian opened the folder. The number at the bottom of the spreadsheet made his eye twitch. $250,000. "Leo, we discussed a budget of $100,000, Julian said, his voice measured. "I agreed to cover the wedding because Dad's retirement fund is tied up, but $250,000 is a house. It's not a party." "It's not just a party, Jules. It's my life," Leo groaned. "Clara's parents are inviting high-profile donors. This is a networking event for us. Besides, you're a millionaire." "What's $250 to you? It's tax deductible or something, right?" Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. He loved his brother, despite the entitlement. He had always been the protector. "I'll look over the line items. But Leo, I have one condition. Sarah and I are getting married next year. I want her involved in some of the planning so she can get a feel for the vendors. It'll be good bonding for her and Clara." Leo's face shifted. The charm vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp awkwardness. "Yeah, about Sarah. That's actually what I came here to talk about." Julian stilled. Sarah was his world, a brilliant pediatric surgeon who had been by his side since he was a broke college student. They had been engaged for 6 months. "Clara and we've talked about it," Leo began, refusing to meet Julian's eyes. "And we've decided to make the wedding family-only for the inner circle. Plus there's some tension." "Tension? What tension?" "Clara's ex-boyfriend is her man of honor," Leo muttered. "And Sarah, well, you know she had that public disagreement with Clara at the New Year's party about healthcare policy. Clara is very sensitive. She feels like Sarah judges her. For the sanctity of the day, we think it's better if Sarah doesn't attend." The silence in the room became deafening. Julian felt the blood turn to ice in his veins. "Let me get this straight," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want me to write a check for $250,000 to fund a wedding that my own fiancée, the woman who will be your sister-in-law, is banned from attending?" "It's not banned, Jules. It's just better for the vibe. You'll still be my best man. You're the most important person there." Julian stood up, the chair screeching against the floor. He picked up the cream folder and handed it back to Leo. "I'm not the most important person there, Leo," Julian said. "The provider is. And the provider just went out of business. Get out of my office." "Wait, you can't be serious. The deposits are due Friday." "Then I suggest you start driving for Uber," Julian replied. "Because I'm not paying a single cent for a wedding that insults the woman I love." The silence that followed Leo's departure from Julian's office didn't last long. In the world of the Vanderbilt-esque social circles of the East Coast, news of a financial embargo traveled faster than a private jet. Julian had barely finished his third espresso when his phone began to vibrate with a rhythmic, aggressive intensity. It was his mother, Evelyn. Evelyn was a woman who viewed family harmony as a curated art gallery. Everything had to look perfect from the outside, regardless of how much rot was behind the walls. To her, Julian wasn't just a son, he was the foundation, and foundations weren't allowed to crack. "Julian Mark Avery, Her voice crackled through the Bluetooth speakers of his office. She didn't wait for a hello. I have just had Clara's mother on the phone in literal tears. She says you are threatening to bankrupt the wedding. Tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me you haven't actually cut off your only brother. Julian leaned back, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. It's not a misunderstanding, Mom. Leo and Clara decided that Sarah isn't inner circle enough to attend the wedding. If Sarah isn't invited to the party, I'm not invited to pay for it. It's a very simple transaction. Transaction? Julian, this is a wedding, not a corporate buyout. Evelyn's voice rose an octave. Clara is a sensitive girl. She's under immense pressure. She and Sarah have differences. You know Sarah can be very intimidating, with her surgical precision, and that I know better attitude. Clara just wants a day where she feels like the smartest person in the room. Is that so much to ask? If she wants to feel like the smartest person in the room, she should invite different people, not ban my future wife, Julian snapped. Mom, I have worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to provide the lifestyle you and Dad enjoy and to keep Leo in designer clothes. I have never asked for anything in return except respect. This is where I draw the line. You're being petty, his mother hissed. You're choosing a girl you've known for 5 years over the brother you've known for 26. Blood is thicker than water, Julian. Actually, the full quote is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, Julian countered calmly. It means the bonds you choose are stronger. I choose Sarah. Every single time. The line went dead. Julian knew this was just the opening volley. By that evening, the theater of war had shifted to his parents' estate in Connecticut. Julian had driven up, not to apologize but to ensure his father heard the truth before Leo could twist it. The Avery dinner table was a place of high-tension etiquette. His father, Arthur, sat at the head, looking weary. Leo and Clara were already there, sitting close together like victims in a storm. Clara's eyes were artfully puffy, the kind of look achieved with a little bit of pink eyeshadow and a lot of practice in front of a mirror. Julian, Arthur said, nodding toward a chair. Let's skip the pleasantries. Leo tells me you're withdrawing the $250,000 gift. It was a $100,000 gift that turned into a $250,000 demand, Julian corrected, taking his seat. He didn't look at Leo. And yes, I am withdrawing it because Sarah was uninvited. She wasn't uninvited, Clara chimed in, her voice trembling. We just were having a very specific vision for the guest list. It's about energy, Julian. Sarah's energy is very clinical. She makes me feel like I'm a patient under a microscope. I just wanted to be surrounded by people who support my soul. Julian almost laughed. Your soul seems to require a very expensive venue, Clara. Does my money have the right energy for you? Because it's clinical too. It's earned through spreadsheets and late nights. Enough, Arthur barked. Julian, you have the money. It's a drop in the bucket for your firm. Why make a scene? Just pay the bill, let Sarah stay home and have a spa day, and we can all move on. I'll even pay for her spa day myself. Julian looked at his father, the man he had always looked up to. He realized then that his father wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in quiet. Dad, if I do this, I am telling Sarah that she is second class. I am telling Leo that he can disrespect my household as long as he cries to you afterward. I won't do it. Then you're an asshole, Leo spat, finally breaking his silence. You're a rich, arrogant asshole who thinks he can control people's lives with his bank account. It's my wedding, my one day, and you're ruining it because your ego is bruised. My ego? Julian stood up. Leo, you haven't paid a phone bill in 3 years. I pay for your car insurance. I paid for the ring you put on Clara's finger. If you want to be the man of your own house, start by paying for your own party. Until then, you don't get to dictate who is worthy of being in my presence. Julian walked out of the dining room, the sound of his mother's frantic sobs following him into the hallway. When he got back to his apartment in the city, Sarah was waiting for him. She was in her scrubs, looking exhausted after a 12-hour shift. She saw his face and knew. They didn't budge, did they? She asked softly. They think I'm the villain, Sarah. My own father told me to just pay and leave you behind. Sarah walked over and took his hands. Her touch was warm, grounded. Julian, I don't care about the wedding. I really don't. I'd rather spend that weekend working in the ER than being around Clara. If it makes the peace, you can just pay. I'll stay behind. It's okay. Julian looked at her. This woman who saved lives, who never asked for credit, who was willing to be insulted, just to make his life easier. No, Julian said, kissing her forehead. It's not okay. Because if I let them do this now, they will do it when we have kids. They will do it at every Christmas and every Thanksgiving. They need to learn that I am not an ATM and you are not an option. He sat down at his laptop. He had a feeling Leo wouldn't go quietly. He was right. An hour later, Julian's phone chimed with a notification from a private family Facebook group. Clara had posted a long, rambling status about family members who use wealth as a weapon, and the heartbreak of realizing your brother doesn't value your happiness. The comments were already filling up with distant cousins and family friends. Oh no, Leo, stay strong. That's so manipulative of Julian. Money really does change people. Julian felt a flicker of heat in his chest. They wanted a public fight. They were going to get one. But Julian wasn't going to argue about feelings. He was going to argue with facts. He opened his banking app and started downloading the PDF receipts of every loan he had given Leo over the last 2 years. The rent payments, the emergency credit card bailouts, the $15,000 engagement ring invoice. He didn't post them. Not yet. He was waiting for the right moment. But then he saw a new comment from Leo. It's fine, guys. We'll just have a smaller wedding. It's sad that Julian would rather see his brother fail than admit his fiancée is a buzzkill. Julian's grip tightened on his phone. The buzzkill comment was the final straw. He didn't reply to the thread. Instead, he sent a short professional email to the Hamptons venue and the catering company. He had been the one to sign the initial letter of intent and provide his credit card for the holding deposit. To whom it may concern, he wrote, I am officially withdrawing my financial backing for the Avery Summers wedding. Please remove my card from your files immediately. Any further charges will be disputed as unauthorized. He hit send. The war had officially begun. In the U.S., weddings were a billion-dollar industry built on dreams. But Julian was about to show his family that those dreams had a very real, very unforgiving price tag. The Monday morning sun bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian's Manhattan office, but the view didn't bring him its usual sense of calm. He had barely slept. The family group chat on his phone had been muted, but the notifications still sat there like unexploded landmines, 342 unread messages. He was sipping a lukewarm coffee when his desk phone rang. It was his personal assistant, Marcus. Julian, I have a Mrs. Gable online too. She's the lead coordinator for the Gilded Lily, the wedding planning firm Leo hired. She sounds frantic. Julian straightened his tie. Put her through. Mr. Avery? A woman's voice shrilled through the receiver. I just received your email regarding the withdrawal of financial backing. There must be some mistake. We have you on file as the primary guarantor for the entire contract. The floral arrangements from Holland were literally just cleared for shipment. Julian frowned. Mrs. Gable, I never signed a final contract. I signed a letter of intent for a $100,000 budget. Anything beyond that was never authorized by me. There was a long, terrifying pause on the other end. Julian heard the sound of papers ruffling, then the click of a mouse. That's not what my records show, Mr. Avery, she said, her voice dropping to a cautious professional tone. I have a signed master service agreement here. It was docu-signed from your IP address 3 weeks ago. It authorizes a total spend of $275,000 with a personal guarantee clause signed in your name. It even has your social security number and your personal banking routing info for the final wire transfer. The world seemed to tilt. Julian felt a cold sweat prickle at the back of his neck. He hadn't signed anything 3 weeks ago. He had been in London for a series of acquisitions. Mrs. Gable, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I need you to email me a copy of that signed contract immediately. Do not process another cent. If a wire transfer is initiated, I will be forced to involve the authorities. 5 minutes later, the PDF arrived. Julian opened it, and his heart sank. The signature was a digital script, an electronic signature, but it was his name. The IP address listed in the metadata didn't belong to his office or his apartment. It belonged to his parents' house in Connecticut. Leo hadn't just been entitled. He had been criminal. Leo knew Julian's personal details, growing up as the golden child, Leo had always had access to everything. He knew where Julian kept his old tax returns. He knew his brother's habits. He had gambled that Julian would be too embarrassed by the family scandal to ever check the fine print. He figured Julian would just see the bill, grumble, and pay it to keep the peace. Julian didn't call his mother. He didn't call his father. He called his lawyer, Silas. "Silas, I need a cease and desist drafted immediately," Julian said, pacing the length of his office. "And I need you to look at a case of digital forgery. My brother used my identity to sign a $250,000 wedding contract." "Julian, wait," Silas said, his voice the voice of reason. "This is family. If you go after him for fraud, he's looking at felony charges. It'll destroy your parents. It'll destroy his reputation. Are you sure you want to go nuclear?" "He didn't just steal money, Silas. He tried to bind me to a debt for a wedding I'm not even allowed to bring my fiancée to. He used my life's work to fund his fantasy. Draft the papers." By 2 p.m., Julian was back in his car, heading toward the Hamptons. He wasn't going to the wedding venue. He was going to the rental house Leo and Clara had taken for the month, a lavish beachfront property that Julian now realized was probably also charged to one of his secondary credit cards. When he arrived, the scene was the picture of luxury. Clara was on the deck with 3 bridesmaids, drinking mimosas and laughing. Leo was by the grill, looking like the king of the world. When Leo saw Julian's car, he waved, a smug grin on his face. He thought Julian had come to apologize. He thought the silent treatment had worked. "Jules, good to see you, man," Leo shouted, wiping his hands on a linen towel. "I knew you'd come around. Listen, I talked to Clara, and we think we can find a way to get Sarah a seat at the friends' table in the back if you—" Julian didn't wait for him to finish. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the manila envelope Silas had prepared. He tossed it onto the grill side table, narrowly missing a plate of expensive Wagyu beef. "What's this? An early wedding gift?" Leo laughed, reaching for the envelope. "It's a choice, Leo," Julian said, his eyes like flint. "Inside that envelope is a copy of the contract you forged, using my social security number. There is also a formal demand to nullify the contract and a cease and desist." Leo's face went white. The color drained from his lips so fast, it was like a curtain falling. He didn't open the envelope. He didn't have to. "I don't know what you're talking about," Leo stammered, though his hands were shaking. I thought you said you'd take care of it. I just handled the paperwork to save you time." "To save me time?" Julian stepped closer. The bridesmaids on the deck had stopped laughing. They were leaning over the railing, watching the drama unfold. "You committed identity theft, Leo. In the state of New York, for this amount of money, that's a Class C felony. That's 5 to 15 years in prison." Clara ran down the stairs, her silk robe fluttering. "Julian, what are you doing? You're upsetting the neighbors. We're supposed to have our engagement photos this evening." "There is no wedding, Clara," Julian said, turning to her. "The vendors have been notified that the guarantor has withdrawn. The flowers aren't coming. The catering is canceled. And unless Leo signs the confession and the release of liability I've drafted, I'm driving straight to the precinct." "You wouldn't," Clara gasped. "You're his brother." "He stopped being my brother when he used my name to steal $250,000, Julian replied. Leo looked at the envelope, then at Julian. The golden boy mask was finally shattered. Underneath was just a scared, lazy boy who had never been told no. "If you do this, Mom and Dad will never speak to you again," Leo whispered, a last-ditch effort at emotional blackmail. "You'll be the man who sent his brother to jail over a party. Is that the legacy you want?" Julian looked at his watch. "You have 60 seconds to sign the withdrawal papers, Leo. Or we can see what a judge thinks about legacies." The silence on the beachfront was absolute, save for the sound of the waves. For the first time in his life, Leo realized that the bank was truly closed. By the time Julian pulled into his driveway in Manhattan, the digital fires were already raging. His phone was hot to the touch, vibrating incessantly with pings from Instagram, TikTok, and X, formerly Twitter. Clara had chosen her weapon, a front-facing camera, and a filter that made her look pale and heartbroken. The video was already at 500,000 views. "I never thought I'd have to make a video like this," Clara sobbed into the camera, her voice perfectly shaky. But family is supposed to be your safety net. Today, my fiancé's brother, someone we looked up to, someone who has everything, decided to pull the rug out from under our wedding just weeks before the date. All because I wanted my wedding to be a safe space for my mental health. He's using his millions to bully us into submission. The comment section was a Shark Tank. Name and shame him, one user wrote. Rich people are literally the worst. Imagine ruining someone's life over a power trip, said another. Julian sat in his dark living room, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his eyes. Sarah walked in, her face pale. She held her own phone out to him. Julian, my coworkers are asking me if this is about us, she whispered. Clara didn't name you directly in the video, but she tagged the Avery Foundation. People are connecting the dots. They're finding my LinkedIn. They're calling me the clinical fiancé who ruined the vibe. Julian felt a surge of protectiveness so strong, it made his hands shake. She's trying to lynch us in the court of public opinion because she couldn't steal from us in a court of law. What are we going to do? Sarah asked. If this keeps up, the hospital board might ask me to take a leave of absence. They hate scandalous publicity. Julian stood up, his mind shifting into crisis management mode. In the U.S., the first person to tell the story usually wins, but the person with the receipts wins the war. She wants to play the victim? Let's show them the bill. Julian didn't make a tearful video. He didn't use a filter. He called a friend of his, a prominent tech journalist with a massive following, and asked for a favor. But before that, he made one last call to his mother. Mom, tell Clara to take the video down. Now, Julian said, his voice cold. Oh, Julian, the poor girl is just venting, Evelyn cried. She's devastated. You've embarrassed her. This is her only way to regain some dignity. Dignity? Julian laughed harshly. She's accusing me of financial abuse on a platform with millions of people. If that video isn't gone in 30 minutes, I am uploading the DocuSign metadata and the police report for the forgery. I was going to let Leo walk away with a confession and a release, but now I'll let the internet see exactly who funded her safe space for the last 3 years. You wouldn't dare ruin your brother's life like that, his mother gasped. Watch me. 30 minutes passed. The video stayed up. In fact, Clara posted a part 2, claiming she was being threatened into silence. Julian sighed. He hated that it had come to this, but he knew how the American internet worked. If you don't defend your reputation, the lie becomes the truth. He didn't post the police report. Not yet. Instead, he posted a single image to his public LinkedIn and Instagram stories. It was a simple black and white spreadsheet. No names were blurred except for sensitive bank digits. It showed 3 years of sibling support, totaling $412,000. Underneath, he wrote a caption that was pure professional fire. I believe in supporting family. I have provided over $400K in personal support to my brother over 3 years, including his rent, car, and engagement ring. I agreed to a $100K wedding gift. When that gift was unilaterally increased to $275K through unauthorized use of my identity and financial data, and my own fiancé was excluded from the event, I exercised my right to withdraw. Charity ends where fraud and disrespect begin. We will not be commenting further. All legal matters are being handled by counsel. The internet shifted in an instant. The financial abuse narrative crumbled. Wait. $400K? One top comment read. I don't even like my brother enough to buy him a taco. Julian is a saint. He paid for the ring, and she's still uninvited his wife? The audacity is astronomical. By midnight, the hashtag Team Julian was trending. But the victory felt hollow. Julian's phone rang. It was his father, Arthur. But Arthur wasn't calling to congratulate him on winning the PR war. I hope you're happy, Julian, Arthur said, his voice sounding older than Julian had ever heard it. Leo is locked in his room. Clara's family has pulled their support because they're embarrassed by the fraud allegations. The wedding is dead. And your mother says she doesn't want to see you at Christmas. You've won the money, son, but you've lost your family. Was it worth it? Julian looked at Sarah, who was sleeping soundly on the sofa, exhausted from the stress. He thought about the years he spent being the reliable one, the ATM, the person everyone turned to but no one actually respected. Yes, Dad, Julian said firmly, because for the first time in my life, I'm not paying for someone else's mistakes. That's a bargain at twice the price. He hung up. But as he looked at the unauthorized contract again, he noticed something in the small print he had missed before. A name listed as a witness to the forged signature. It wasn't Clara. It was his mother's personal email address. The revelation of his mother's email address on the forged contract felt like a physical blow. Julian sat in his study, the cursor blinking on the screen, mocking him. Evelyn hadn't just stood by while Leo stole his identity. She had held the flashlight. He realized now why his mother had been so aggressive in her defense of Leo. It wasn't just motherly love. It was a cover-up. If the fraud came to light, her reputation as the matriarch of the Avery family would be incinerated. In the high society circles of Connecticut, a mother helping one son rob the other was the kind of scandal that got you blacklisted from every country club and charity board in the state. "Julian, you've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes. Sarah walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She looked at the screen, saw the highlighted email address, and closed her eyes. She didn't look surprised. "You knew," Julian whispered. "I didn't know she helped him forge it," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the desk. "But I knew she was capable of it. Evelyn has always viewed you as a resource, Julian, not a son. You're the success story she uses to fund the golden child's failures." Julian shook his head, the betrayal stinging more than the loss of the money. "But why? Why does she hate you so much that she'd help them ban you from the wedding? It doesn't make sense. If I'm the resource, wouldn't she want to keep me happy?" Sarah sighed, setting her tea down. "It's not that she hates me, Julian. It's that she's afraid of me, and so is Clara." Julian frowned. "Afraid of what? You're a pediatric surgeon, Sarah. You spend your days saving toddlers. You're the least threatening person I know." "Not to Clara," Sarah said. Her voice took on a clinical, detached tone, the one she used when delivering a difficult diagnosis. "Do you remember the charity gala 3 years ago? The one for the children's hospital?" "Vaguely. I remember you were working the late shift and arrived after the speeches." "Right. Well, before I met you in the lobby, I saw Clara. She wasn't Clara Summers back then. She was going by Claire. She was with a man, a prominent donor in his late 60s. I recognized her because she had been a patient in the psych ward at the hospital I interned at in Chicago." Julian felt his breath hitch. "The psych ward? For what?" "It wasn't a mental health crisis, Julian. It was insurance fraud," Sarah revealed. She had been part of a ring that was faking medical emergencies to get payouts from high-end providers. She was the victim who would show up with mysterious symptoms, get expensive tests, and then her lawyer would sue for malpractice or settle with the insurance. I was the intern who caught the discrepancy in her blood work. I flagged it. The hospital launched an investigation, and Claire vanished before the police arrived. The room went cold. "So when she saw you at the New Year's party," Julian started. "She turned white as a sheet," Sarah finished. She realized that the woman her fiancé's brother was marrying was the one person who could expose her entire history. "She's not sensitive to my energy, Julian. She's terrified I'll tell you that she's a professional con artist who saw Leo, and by extension, your bank account, as her biggest score yet." Julian stood up, pacing the room. The pieces were fitting together with a sickening click. The family-only guest list wasn't about vibes. It was a strategic move to ensure Sarah wasn't in the same room as Clara's family or friends, where stories might be swapped or secrets leaked. She likely knew Clara was trouble, but was so desperate to see Leo settled and off her own payroll that she was willing to help Clara bury the truth. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Julian asked, his voice strained. "Because I love you," Sarah said, her eyes filling with tears. "And I knew that if I told you, I'd be the one destroying the family. I wanted you to see who they were on your own. I didn't want to be the evil fiancé whispering in your ear. I wanted you to choose me because of us, not because they were bad." Julian grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "To Connecticut," Julian said. "I'm not going for a wedding, and I'm not going for a fight. I'm going to give my mother an ultimatum. She has one chance to tell me the truth about that contract, or I'm handing the metadata to the FBI. "Julian, wait," Sarah called out, but he was already out the door. The drive to Connecticut was a blur of high-speed turns and white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. As he pulled up to the Avery estate, the lights were on in the drawing room. He could see the silhouettes of his parents and Leo through the curtains. They were arguing. He didn't knock. He used his key, the one they hadn't changed yet, and walked in. The argument stopped instantly. Leo looked like he had been crying. His father looked ashamed. His mother, Evelyn, stood by the fireplace, a glass of sherry in her hand, looking as regal and cold as an ice sculpture. "Julian," his mother said, her voice steady, "I assume you've come to apologize for that horrific social media post. It was beneath you." "I'm not here for the post, Mother," Julian said, walking to the center of the room. He took out his phone and pulled up the contract metadata. He held it up so the light caught the screen. "I'm here to talk about your IP address and your email. I'm here to talk about why you helped Leo commit a felony against your own son." Evelyn's hand didn't shake, but her eyes narrowed. "I did what was necessary to ensure your brother had a future. You have more than enough, Julian. You're greedy. You were going to let a few $1,000s ruin Leo's happiness." "It was $250,000, Evelyn," Arthur shouted, finally snapping. He looked at his wife with a mixture of horror and disgust. "You told me Julian had approved it. You told me he was happy to do it." "He should have been happy," Evelyn shrieked, her composure finally breaking. "Leo is fragile. He needs this. He needs Clara. Without this wedding, he's nothing. He's nothing because you never let him be anything," Julian yelled back. "And Clara? You're so desperate to get rid of Leo that you're willing to tie him to a woman who has a history of medical insurance fraud in Chicago. A woman who Sarah recognized from a psych ward sting." The silence that followed was absolute. Leo turned to his mother, his face a mask of confusion. "Mom, what is he talking about? Clara she's from a good family. She told me." "Clara told you what you wanted to hear, Leo," Julian said, his voice softening with a sudden sharp pity. "And Mom helped her hide the truth because she wanted you off her hands. They didn't want Sarah there because Sarah knows exactly who Clara is." Leo looked at his mother. "Did you know?" Evelyn looked away, her silence the only answer they needed. "I'm done," Julian said, turning toward the door. "Dad, I'll keep paying for your medical insurance and the property taxes on this house. But as for the rest of you, the bank is closed. If I see another post, another venting video, or if I hear one more word about Sarah, I'm calling the authorities." As Julian walked out, he heard the sound of Leo's glass shattering against the floor, and his brother's first real sob of realization. He had saved his money, but as he drove back to Sarah, he realized he had lost the only home he had ever known. But then he looked at the passenger seat, where a photo of him and Sarah sat in the console. He wasn't going home. He was going to his home. The real wedding was yet to come. The drive back to Manhattan was the quietest 2 hours of Julian's life. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He realized that for 32 years, he hadn't been a brother or a son. He had been a premium subscription service, and he had just hit cancel. When he entered the apartment, Sarah was sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights. She didn't ask what happened. She just saw the way he carried his shoulders and poured him a glass of water. "It's over," Julian said, sitting beside her. "The fraud, the favoritism, the lies, it's all out in the open. My mother helped him, Sarah. She was the one who pushed the buttons." Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand. "What happens now? They still have those contracts. The vendors are going to come for someone's head." "Let them," Julian said, a small dark smile playing on his lips. "I've already notified the bank to flag any attempt at a wire transfer. But I've been thinking. I had $100,000 set aside for that gift, money that was already gone in my mind." "You're not giving it to them," Sarah said, her voice firm. "No," Julian replied. "I'm going to use it to do what they should have done. I'm going to fund a truth and reconciliation project for the people they actually hurt." The next morning, Julian didn't head to his VC firm. He went to a small, nondescript office in Queens. It was the headquarters of a nonprofit that specialized in helping victims of medical insurance fraud, the very thing Clara had been involved in. He wrote a check for $50,000 as an anonymous donor, specifically to help families whose credit had been ruined by phantom medical bills. With the other $50,000, he did something even more personal. He contacted a private security and investigative firm. If Clara Somers was a professional, she didn't just have one mark. She had a trail. "I want everything," Julian told the investigator. "Every alias, every ex-husband, every lawsuit. If she's going to be in my family, I want the full biography." While Julian was building his defense, Clara was making her final desperate move. She knew the victim video on TikTok was losing steam. People were starting to ask for proof of the financial abuse. She needed a new angle, something that would force Julian's hand before he could expose her past. At 2:00 p.m., a leak hit a popular celebrity gossip blog that covered wealthy New York families. The headline was scandalous. Tech mogul's fiancée accused of using medical access to stalk groom-to-be. The article, fed by an anonymous source close to the bride, suggested that Sarah had used her position at the hospital to access Clara's private medical records and was using them to blackmail the couple into calling off the wedding. In the U.S., HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act violations, are no joke. It's a federal crime for a doctor to look at someone's records without a medical reason. If the public believed Sarah had stalked Clara's files, her career was over. "Julian, look at this," Sarah whispered, her face ashen as she showed him the article on her phone. "I never looked at her files. I didn't have to. I recognized her face from years ago. But how do I prove a negative?" Julian felt a roar of anger. "They're trying to take your license, Sarah. They're trying to destroy your life because I stopped paying for theirs." Within an hour, Sarah's hospital administrator called. "Dr. Evans, we've seen the allegations online. Until we can conduct a full internal audit of our digital access logs to ensure no privacy breaches occurred, we have to place you on administrative leave." Sarah sat on the bed, her head in her hands. This was Clara's wild card. She didn't need the $250,000 anymore. She wanted revenge. She wanted to show Julian that if she didn't get his money, he wouldn't get his peace. But Clara had made one fatal mistake. She assumed Julian was playing by the polite society rules. She assumed he would spend weeks trying to disprove the lie. Julian didn't wait. He didn't even call his lawyer. He went to the one person who knew Clara's secrets better than anyone, her man of honor, the ex-boyfriend who was supposed to be at the wedding. Julian had tracked him down to a dive bar in Jersey City. The man, a tired-looking guy named Mark, didn't look like a high society type. He looked like someone who had been chewed up and spat out by the Clara Somers machine. "I know why you're here," Mark said, staring into his beer as Julian sat down. "You're the brother with the money." "I'm the brother with the evidence," Julian corrected. "Why are you helping her, Mark? Why stay in the man of honor role for a woman who clearly used you?" Mark laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Because I owe her $40,000. She told me if I showed up, played the part of the supportive ex to make her look desirable to your family, she'd wipe the debt. She's got a folder on me, man. Things I did when I was desperate." Julian leaned in. "I'll double it. $80,000. Right now. But I don't want you to play a part. I want you to tell the truth. I want the folder she has on you. And I want the folder you have on her." Mark looked at Julian, then at the checkbook on the table. The loyalty of a con artist's circle is only as deep as the last payout. "She has a storage unit in Stamford," Mark whispered. "Under my name but her key. It's full of souvenirs from her past marks. Old IDs, hospital gowns, legal settlements. She keeps them like trophies." Julian stood up. "Let's go for a drive, Mark. We're going to give the hospital board something much more interesting to look at than an audit." As they drove towards Stamford, Julian realized that the wild card wasn't a move, it was a mindset. He was no longer trying to save his family. He was burning the bridge so no one could ever cross it again. The chapter ends with Julian standing in front of a rusted storage locker, the key turning in the lock. Behind that door was the end of Clara Somers, and the beginning of a very public, very legal reckoning. The Avery family home, in Connecticut, was usually a sanctuary of quiet wealth. But as the scheduled wedding date passed without a ceremony, the silence felt more like a tomb. That was until a black Bentley, one far more expensive than Julian's, pulled into the circular driveway. Out stepped Silas Avery. Silas was Julian's paternal uncle, a man who had been erased from the family tree 15 years ago. While Arthur had stayed in the world of old money and safe investments, Silas had gone to Silicon Valley and made a fortune in high-risk tech. He was the black sheep, the man who didn't care about tradition or etiquette. Julian was at the house when Silas arrived, helping his father move his things into the guest wing. Arthur and Evelyn were officially separating. "Well, well," Silas said, his voice a gravelly baritone as he walked into the drawing room. "I heard the Avery empire was crumbling over a guest list and a grifter. I had to come see the wreckage for myself." Arthur looked up, his face ashen. "Silas, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to offer a solution," Silas said, looking at Julian with a sharp, appraising glint in his eye. "I heard about your brother, Julian. I heard he's currently hiding in a motel because the bride skipped town when she found out the FBI was asking questions about her medical history." Julian crossed his arms. "The bride is currently being investigated for 3 counts of insurance fraud. Leo is just lucky he was too stupid to be a co-conspirator. What's your solution, Uncle Silas?" Silas sat in his brother's favorite armchair, looking entirely too comfortable. "The family name is trash right now. The socialites are laughing. The Avery Foundation's donors are pulling out. You, Julian, have the money, but you're too moral to fix the optics. You want to be right. I want to be efficient." "What do you want?" Julian asked. "I'll pay off the vendors," Silas said casually. "The $275,000 for the ghost wedding. I'll settle Leo's debts. I'll even set up a trust for Leo so he never has to work a day in his life. On one condition." Julian felt a familiar prickle of suspicion. "And that condition is?" "The Avery Foundation," Silas said, his eyes narrowing. "Arthur, you've been running it like a 1950s country club. It's stagnant. I want control. I want the voting rights. I want to turn it into a venture fund for my tech interests. If Julian agrees to step down from the board and hand me his seat, I'll make this entire scandal disappear. No more lawsuits, no more police reports. I'll make the Clara problem go away with a very large, very quiet settlement." Julian looked at his father. Arthur looked desperate. He wanted the shame to end. He wanted the debt gone. He wanted to go back to a world where people didn't whisper when he walked into the room. "Julian," Arthur whispered, "it's just a board seat. You have your own firm. You don't need the foundation. If Silas pays, the forgery investigation dies. Leo won't go to jail. Your mother can come home." Julian looked at his uncle. Silas was a shark. He didn't care about Leo's fragility or Evelyn's dignity. He wanted the Avery name as a shell for his own power. If Julian agreed, he would be saving his brother and mother from the consequences of their own actions. But he would be handing a predator the keys to the family's legacy. "You're asking me to pay for their crimes by giving you my grandfather's legacy," Julian said. "I'm asking you to be the provider one last time," Silas smirked. "Fix this." Julian walked to the window. In the U.S., this was the ultimate succession move. The family was broken, and the vultures were circling. If he walked away, Leo might actually face prison time for the forgery, and Evelyn's role as an accomplice would be public record. If he stayed, he would be working alongside a man he despised, protecting people who had betrayed him. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the way she had been targeted. "I have a counteroffer, Silas," Julian said, turning around. The room went still. "I won't give you my seat," Julian said. "In fact, I'm buying out the foundation entirely. I've already liquidating my shares in the New York firm. I'm taking the Avery name, the assets, and the board. And as for Leo and Mom, I'm not paying their debt to save them. I'm paying it to own them." Arthur gasped. Silas sat up, the smirk vanishing. "I've drafted a family agreement," Julian continued, pulling a document from his pocket. "I will pay the $275,000. I will settle the legal fees, but in exchange, Leo and Mother will sign a lifetime non-disparagement agreement. They will move to the cottage in Maine, the one that's in my name. They will receive a monthly allowance, provided by me, contingent on their total silence. No TikToks, no interviews, no inner circle drama. They will live a quiet, comfortable, and completely invisible life." "You're turning us into prisoners," Evelyn's voice came from the doorway. She looked disheveled, the Ice Queen facade melting into panic. "No, mother," Julian said, his voice cold and final. "I'm turning you into dependents, which is what you've always wanted to be. You just didn't realize that when I'm the one paying, I'm the one who writes the script." He looked at Silas. "The foundation isn't for sale, Uncle. And neither is my conscience." Silas stood up, laughing. "You've got more of my blood in you than your father's, Julian. Fine, pay the bill. Buy your silence. But remember, a family kept in a cage eventually learns how to bite." As Silas left, Julian felt a strange sense of heavy peace. He had saved them, but he had also ended them. He had become the patriarch, not through love, but through a cold, necessary audit. Julian had paid the non-refundable $40,000 deposit for the private dining room weeks ago. Most people would have let the reservation lapse, but Julian wasn't most people. He didn't want the money to go to waste, and he didn't want the staff, the waiters, the chefs, the valets, to lose out on their tips because of his family's implosion. He renamed the event The Audit. He invited Sarah, of course, and her closest friends from the hospital. He invited Mark, the ex-boyfriend who had finally broken free from Clara's grip. He even invited Mrs. Gable, the wedding planner, who had been caught in the middle of Leo's fraud. The atmosphere was surreal. Crystal chandeliers hung over a table set for 30, but the bride and groom were nowhere to be seen. Instead of wedding toasts, the room was filled with the sound of people who had been used by the Avery family, finally feeling seen. "To Julian," Mrs. Gable said, raising a glass of vintage champagne, "for being the only person in this zip code who actually understands the meaning of a contract." Julian smiled, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. He had a feeling the main cottage agreement hadn't sat well with everyone. Halfway through the main course, a Wagyu steak that should have been Leo's celebration meal, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. Leo stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept or showered in 3 days. His expensive linen suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. Behind him stood Evelyn, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. The room went dead silent. The clink of silverware stopped. "Having a party, Jules?" Leo shouted, his voice cracking. He stumbled into the room, leaning on a chair for support. "Eating the food I picked out? Drinking the wine I chose? With the woman who destroyed my life?" He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply set her fork down and looked at him with the professional pity she usually reserved for patients in the ICU. "You destroyed your own life, Leo," Julian said, not standing up. "I'm just paying the bill for the wreckage." "You think you're so much better than us," Leo screamed, ignoring the stares of the other guests. "You think because you have the bank account you get to play God? You're sending Mom to a cottage in the middle of nowhere? You're putting me on an allowance like a child?" "You are a child, Leo," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level of calm. A 30-year-old child who tried to steal his brother's identity because he was too lazy to earn his own way. "You're lucky I'm giving you a cottage. Most people would have given you a jail cell." Evelyn stepped forward, her face pale. "Julian, please, this is a public place. Think of the reputation." "The reputation is gone, Mother," Julian interrupted. "Look around. These are the people you and Leo tried to cheat. These are the people Clara tried to lie to. They don't care about your reputation. They care about the truth." Leo grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby service station and took a long swig. "I loved her, you know, Clara. She made me feel like I wasn't just Julian's brother. She made me feel powerful. She made you feel like a Mark, Leo." Mark, the ex-boyfriend, spoke up from the end of the table. "I was the one before you, and there was someone before me. She picks guys like you, guys with deep pockets and shallow egos, and she drains them. You weren't a husband to her. You were a lottery ticket." Leo looked at Mark, the reality finally sinking in. He lunged at him, but Julian was faster. He stood up and stepped between them, his hand firm on Leo's chest. "That's enough," Julian said. "You've made your scene. Now, you have a choice. You can walk out of here, go to the car I've provided, and drive to Maine tonight. Or I can call the police right now and hand them the DocuSign logs. I won't ask again." Leo looked around the room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the wedding planner. He saw the disgust in the eyes of his brother's friends. and finally, he saw the absolute, unshakable resolve in Julian's face. The golden boy finally broke. He slumped into a chair and began to sob. Not the fake, manipulative sobs he used on his mother, but the jagged, ugly cries of a man who realized he had nothing left. Evelyn went to him, stroking his hair, but she didn't look at Julian. She couldn't. She had bet on the wrong son, and she knew it. "Take him home, mother," Julian said softly. "The car is waiting." As they were escorted out by the restaurant security, the room stayed silent for a long time. Then, Sarah reached out and took Julian's hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. Julian looked at the empty seat at the head of the table, the seat where the groom was supposed to be. He felt a weight lift off his chest that had been there for 20 years. "I'm better than okay," Julian said. "For the first time in my life, the ledger is balanced." He turned to the room and raised his glass. "To a new chapter, one where we choose our family, and we never ever pay for someone else's lies." Julian woke up in his Manhattan apartment to the sound of silence. There were no frantic calls from caterers, no screaming matches with his mother, and no emergency invoices from Leo. He walked into the kitchen, where Sarah was sipping coffee, wearing his oversized college sweatshirt. She looked more beautiful in that moment than she ever would have in the $15,000 designer gown Clara had tried to bully Julian into buying. "Happy not a wedding day," Julian said, kissing the top of her head. "It's the best gift you've ever given me," Sarah laughed. "No taffeta, no forced small talk with your cousins, and definitely no Clara." Julian sat down, checking his phone one last time. He had a notification from a security camera in Maine. It showed a small, saltbox cottage overlooking a rocky cliff. He saw the silhouette of his mother, Evelyn, standing on the porch, staring at the gray ocean. She looked small. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of a social whirlwind. She was just a woman in a quiet house, living on an allowance provided by the son she had tried to betray. Leo was nowhere to be seen. He was likely inside, finally facing the silence of a life without an audience. "What are we doing today?" Sarah asked, pulling Julian back to the present. "We're going to the city hall," Julian said. "And then, we're going to the park." In the U.S., the big wedding is often seen as a performance for others. Julian and Sarah decided to make their day a private reality. They took a yellow taxi to the marriage bureau in Lower Manhattan. There was no limo, no floral archway, and no guest list of 300 people who only wanted to network. Their witnesses were Mark, the ex-boyfriend who had become a strange but loyal friend, and a nurse from Sarah's department who had stood by her during the audit scandal. The ceremony took 10 minutes. It cost $35. As they walked out of the building, the midday sun hitting the pavement, Julian felt a surge of genuine joy. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't a legacy move. This was just two people who respected each other, starting a life where the only inner circle was the one they built together. They spent the afternoon in Central Park. Julian had used $5,000, a tiny fraction of the wedding budget, to hire a local jazz trio and a high-end food truck. They invited Sarah's entire pediatric nursing staff and the vendors who had been screwed over by Leo's fake contracts. He had paid those vendors in full, out of his own pocket as a kill fee. They showed up not as workers, but as guests. "I've worked 300 weddings," Mrs. Gable, the wedding planner, told Julian as she ate a taco from the food truck. "Usually, by this time of day, the bride is crying and the groom is hiding in the bar. This is the first time I've seen a couple actually look like they like each other." Julian watched Sarah laughing with a group of residents. She looked light. The shadow of the clinical fiancé label had vanished. But as the sun began to set, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. "She called me, Jules. Clara. She's in Florida. She says she's pregnant. She says if I don't get her $50,000 for medical expenses, she's going to the press and saying you forced her into an abortion. I don't know what to do. Help me." Julian stared at the screen. The old Julian, the provider, the fixer, felt a familiar pull in his chest. His heart started to race. His brain began calculating how to make the problem go away. Then he looked at his wedding ring. He looked at Sarah. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call a private investigator. He typed 5 words into the phone. "Don't call this number again." Then, Julian did something he should have done years ago. He went into his settings and blocked Leo's number. Then he blocked his mother's. Then he blocked the Avery Foundation's secondary lines. He dropped the phone into his pocket and walked over to Sarah. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his expression. "Everything is perfect," Julian said, taking her hand. "The bank is officially closed for the weekend, and for every weekend after that." In Maine, the phone in Leo's hand went dead. In the Hamptons, the empty venue began to dim its lights. And in a park in the middle of New York City, Julian Avery finally stopped being a reliable resource and started being a husband. 6 months had passed since the not-a-wedding day. In New York City, 6 months is enough time for a skyscraper to rise or a reputation to be completely forgotten. Julian and Sarah had settled into a rhythm that felt foreign to Julian, a rhythm defined by peace rather than crisis management. They lived in a new apartment, one that didn't have a spare room for visiting family or a desk cluttered with Leo's unpaid invoices. Julian had stepped down as the CEO of his firm, taking a chairman role that allowed him to be home for dinner every night. One Tuesday evening, Julian sat in his study, looking at a final report from the private investigator he had hired to track Clara. The pregnancy had been, as Julian suspected, another con. Clara had tried the same tactic on a real estate developer in Miami 3 months later. This time, she wasn't so lucky. The developer's legal team was even more aggressive than Julian's. Clara was currently awaiting trial in a federal facility, facing multiple counts of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The Clara summer storm had finally blown itself out. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sarah, holding a small, hand-addressed envelope. "This just came in the mail," she said, her voice cautious. "It's from your father." Julian hesitated. He hadn't spoken to Arthur since the day Silas Avery had tried to stage a coup. He opened the letter. "Julian, I'm writing this from a small hotel in Vermont. I left the house in Connecticut. I realized that for 40 years I let your mother curate a life that was comfortable for her and devastating for you. I watched you carry the weight of this family on your back, and instead of helping you, I just thanked God it wasn't me. I saw the news about that woman in Florida. You were right about her. You were right about everything. I spoke to Leo last week. He's working at a hardware store in Maine. He hates it. He says the work is beneath him, but for the first time, he's paying for his own cigarettes. Maybe there's hope for him yet. I wanted to give you my verdict. You asked me once if you were being an asshole for choosing Sarah over your brother's wedding. My answer then was yes, because I was a coward. My answer now is this. You weren't the asshole, Julian. You were the only one of us who was actually a man. Keep the foundation. Use it for the people who actually deserve your help. I'm going to spend what's left of my life trying to learn how to be someone you'd actually want to have a beer with. With regret, and a little bit of pride, Dad. Julian folded the letter and tucked it into his desk drawer. He felt a lump in his throat, not of sadness, but of a long overdue closure. What does it say? Sarah asked, leaning against the doorframe. It says the debt is settled, Julian replied. Later that night, Julian found himself scrolling through Reddit. He came across a post on the Am I the Asshole subreddit. It was a story about a sister who refused to lend her brother a car. The comments were a battlefield of opinions on family loyalty versus personal boundaries. Julian logged into an anonymous account. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keys. He told his story, from the $250,000 invoice to the forged signatures, from the family-only guest list to the cottage in Maine. He titled it, AITA for refusing to pay for my brother's wedding after he kicked my fiancée off the guest list. The final update. He hit post and watched as the comments flooded in. NTA, not the asshole. You didn't lose a family, you trimmed the dead branches so the tree could grow. Justice served. Is Sarah single? Just kidding. You guys are goals. Julian laughed and closed his laptop. He didn't need the validation of strangers anymore, but it was a nice postscript to a long, expensive war. He walked into the living room, where Sarah was reading a medical journal. She looked up and smiled, and in that smile, Julian saw everything he had fought for. He had lost a brother, a mother, and $250,000. But as he sat down beside his wife, he realized he had never been richer. The cost of silence was high, but the price of freedom? That was something no bank account could ever measure. The Avery legacy was no longer about money. It was about the truth. And for the first time in his life, Julian Avery was exactly where he was supposed to be. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more real story.